Does anybody have any idea what we're doing here?
No, not at all.
Cool. Let's get started then. Good evening and welcome to For Your Reference, brought to you by some of your friendly neighborhood librarians here at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Now, despite what we said before, we do actually have something of an idea of what we're doing tonight. But before we get started with that, sorry?
I said speak for yourself.
Yes, but before we get started, why don't we start with some introductions? Ingrid, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, okay. I am the head of the Learning Commons at the University of Tennessee Knoxville Libraries, of course. U.S. Air Force veteran and Star Trek superfan.
All right.
That you need to know.
Casey, how about you?
Well, I'm Casey Foxx. I'm Director of Advancement with UT Libraries. I have an MLIS from UT. Woo-woo, SIS. What else do you need to know? I am a former tap dancer, so maybe that's something that
So yeah, I'm Robin Bedenbaugh. I'm in charge of marketing and communication for the libraries at UT. Originally from South Carolina, been here in Knoxville for about 8 years. Kind of dig it. Let's see, pastimes, trying to learn the guitar and kickboxing. There we go. So the show, what we're trying to do here, or sort of our frame of reference here, is what we're really talking a lot about is media and information literacy. Because we're librarians and we want to make sure people know how to find information, how to evaluate information, and just generally be better about consuming information.
Yes.
Yes. So any thoughts on that y'all would like to share?
I think more and more every day there are more sources of information out there and more places that people are seeing things, and being able to evaluate that and vet everything that's coming in at us is something that's increasingly vital in our culture. And so I think this is awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. We later on, you're going to be meeting our student success librarian for media literacy. Before that, we have some very special guests. But before we get started with that, stories is going to sort of be the theme, at least of the first part of our show. And our Dean of Libraries, Steve Smith, maintains that everybody has a snake story. So I have a question for both of you. Do you have a snake story?
I don't think I have a snake story.
Okay.
Really? Okay. Well, you are usually exceptional.
I'm good at other things.
Okay.
Not so much having snake stories.
Yeah. Ingrid, how about you?
Well, like all good rural Southern folk, I have multiple snake stories, but I'll tell you my earliest one. So when I was a babe, my mom was in another room and she heard me babbling in my crib as babies do and just making a lot of noise. So she's wondering, I'm supposed to be asleep. So she walks into the room, looks into the crib, and there I am talking to a snake. Now, folk wisdom tells us that it was in fact a milk snake. So, you know, there's certain snakes that are attracted to the smell of milk or just milk in general. But I like to believe that either I am the prophesied wizard come to defeat the unnamed one, or I am a Disney princess. There is no in between. Either I am a prophesied wizard or a Disney princess.
I don't know. I feel like we can combine those two.
I think it might be both.
So I actually, like Ingrid, I grew up out in the country, so I've got a lot of snake stories, but I have one from this past Sunday night. So let me set the scene for you. The wife and I are hanging out on the couch. We are enjoying a glass of wine and watching Supermarket Sweep.
As one does.
Suddenly, our 15-pound orange tabby cat Tiger appears down near my feet. And he's kind of hunched over and he's making this like really low growling noise, like, you know, that sort of thing that cats do. And I look down and there is a tail hanging out of his mouth. So I exclaim, "Oh God." At which point the wife looks over and sees what's going on and she says, "Oh God." A chase ensues. So what you have to understand is we've had some murderous experiences with this cat before. So what thing you need to know is that we are both 100% certain at this point that what is in his mouth is a mouse. So we go after him. Holly decides that what we need to do is get him hemmed up in our downstairs bathroom. There's a hallway and we try to convene on either side of it. I'm not really a fan of this plan, but I don't have one of my own, so I'm just going along for the ride at this point. We get him sort of in there. On the way to my end of the hallway, I grab the broom and dustpan. To what end, I'm not even really sure. It just felt like the right thing to do. As I'm grabbing that, I hear Holly say, "It's a snake." So I'm like, okay, I feel better about this because I've, having grown up in the country, I have a lot of experience with snakes. And I also feel better about possibly hemming him up in the bathroom because another thing you need to know is I was worried that Tiger was going to end up choking on this mouse because I have had to perform the Heimlich maneuver on this cat before, twice. So, Holly has at some point retrieved this spray bottle. And so I'm blocking my end of the hallway. She sprays the cat. He drops the snake. Everyone freezes for a brief moment, including our gray silver tabby cat who has clocked that something is going on and has showed up and is looking at the snake like, I don't know what that is, but I know I'm going to kill it. Now, Tiger then suddenly grabs the snake again and takes off back into the living room around behind the couch where the dog had been hanging out. He's been hanging out on the couch, sort of watching all of this, like, what is going on? Now, Holly is spraying the cat as she runs along. Duke becomes collateral damage in this because he gets sprayed right in the face. He then freaks out and takes off into the other room, nearly trampling the cat with the snake in its mouth because the cat had just rounded the corner of the couch. So I get back into the living room and I position myself so that we can sort of hem Tiger up. Holly grabs Tiger, sprays him again. He drops the snake. I then position myself with the broom and dustpan so that I can fend the cat off and sweep the snake onto the dustpan. Then Holly runs to the back door and I trot through the kitchen holding the little snake in the dustpan and toss him out the back door. We believe he lived because we have yet to find a body. That was our Sunday night.
Maker Market Sweep.
Luckily, we were recording it so we could go back to see what we missed for Supermarket Sweep.
Oh, okay.
I thought you were recording the whole snake hunt. I was like, wow,
if there had been video, I believe this would have been huge on YouTube.
That feels intense. Like my heart was roller coaster ride.
So, so like I said, the theme of our show tonight is stories, and we have some very special guests joining us tonight who are going to be talking about the power of stories and, just sort of how they can shape our beliefs, help us figure out our way through the world. Anything you guys want to say about stories or snakes before we do our next thing?
I think
Story.
I have zero to say about snakes, and I might let the stories speak for themselves tonight.
All right. Well, our very special guest will be having this discussion in a segment we are calling Reviewer 2. So our first guest tonight is Dr. Sam Martin. She is an associate professor and scholar of public address and political communication at Southern Methodist University. Sam, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your new book?
Well, that's not really very kind to make me follow up a snake story. I actually don't. I mean, I went out for a run today. I like to run a lot. I went out for a run today on the path, and there was a little tiny snake like this big, and I was like, well, okay, there's my snake for the day. I am, like you mentioned, I'm a scholar of, I'm a professor here in Dallas, Texas at Southern Methodist University. I'm a scholar of public affairs and political rhetoric. I study conservative social movements and especially evangelical voters. I have a book coming out soon called Decoding the Digital Church, Evangelical Storytelling and the Election of Donald Trump. I'm extremely obsessed with evangelical voters and how they decide their political priorities and develop their political worldview. So it's like a train wreck I can't look away from. So that's what I spend most of my time thinking about.
Cool. So for the uninitiated, because there may be people who are watching this who are not academics, let's talk a little bit about who Reviewer 2 is.
Okay.
And first, I think we should say that if you're a scholar and you want to get published, you have to go through this process called peer review, which means that other people who are in your field and somewhat adjacent get to review your work to make sure your methodology is sound, and generally that you're not just making stuff up out of thin air.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So typically there are going to be, across disciplines, there seems to be a generalized notion of like 3 reviewers, right? So Reviewer 2 is the person who gives you the kind of feedback that is generally unhelpful.
No,
Right.
It's not unhelpful. It's actually usually right on the money. It's just painful. So, so you say 3. When you write something as an academic, the first thing you do is you send it to a publication in the hope that it will get sent out. Normally it just comes right back to you and they say, this is trash. So that's called a desk reject, right? The first person who reads it, you don't even get anywhere, right? So that's number 1. So that normally takes 4 to 6 minutes, right? Not really, but that's how it feels. You work on it for 4 to 6 years, you send it to an editor, they take 4 to 6 minutes and they say, maybe go look at the local Starbucks. So, but if you make it past the editor, then they send it to 2 people. All right. And in what normally feels like it happens is the first you get 2, and to get published, those 2 people have to agree that your blood, sweat, and tears amount to worthy sentences that won't burn people's eyes out if they're subjected to them. And typically, Reviewer 1, the joke goes that Reviewer 1 tells you the truth in a way you can hear it, and Reviewer 2 takes you behind the woodshed and says the things in the ways that they did it in the 50s, right? So they come at you with the verbal belt and leave you very aggressive. I once had, like, my book that's coming out now, the very first publication that I submitted, the second reviewer, when I was still just a graduate student, told me that my this piece of scholarship that actually ended up being published in a top journal was not only not relevant for the field of public address, but had no relevance to communication studies writ large, right? So nice. Which is not true, right? And you should never say that to someone, but like it's, this is getting to be a decade ago, right? This study is not relevant to public address. It's not even no one in the field cares about it, right? That's Reviewer 2.
Yeah. Okay, so playing the role of reviewer 2 for you this evening is our second special guest, Dr. Allison Prasch. She is Assistant Professor of Rhetoric, Politics, and Culture at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Now, before we do your full intro, Allison, I would like to ask Sam a quick question. Sam, you've known Allison for a while now, right?
Yes, Allison is a wonderful friend and colleague.
So she's nothing like this person we just described.
No, in fact, Allison is often Dr. Prasch is often too nice about my work. I'll be very depressed, and I'll know that my work is, in a dumpster fire stage, and she'll be back. No, your work's very important. You have to keep going. It's really good. So no, she's nothing like. She's nothing.
That is good to hear, because we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I think we've all got enough negativity in our lives right now. So thank you both for being here.
Yeah, so she's just playing a role on television for now.
All righty. So tell us more about you, Allison. I understand you also have a book project you're finishing up, or?
Yeah, so I'm in the process of finishing my book manuscript. So I study presidential rhetoric, and specifically my book looks at presidential rhetoric during the Cold War and how various chief executives utilize the act of physical travel outside the United States to create a global imaginary and to kind of demarcate who was with the United States and who was with the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
Very nice. So, all right then. I think it's just time to get down to it. Sam, y'all are gonna be talking about your book tonight. So I hope you read it. And so here are the questions you two will be addressing. The first is, how can we understand evangelical political worldviews by listening to the stories they tell in their churches? And how do the narratives told shape, inform, and fortify political beliefs? At this point, I will leave you to it, and I'll be back later for the Q&A.
Okay. All right. Well, I wish she had left those questions up there. Yeah. So, what I'm trying to do in my book, or what I'm trying to convince people of, is that we have a kind of the collective we, whoever exists in that, you can decide if you're part of it or not. There's a sort of assumption that is embedded in our political culture in the United States that evangelicals are a politically obsessed subgroup in the United States that vote based on abortion and marriage equality and wanting to turn back the clock to the 1950s. And I have had the opportunity in my life to know a lot of conservative evangelicals. And for the most part, I don't find them to be any more interested in politics than people who are not members of the church. And so that was kind of the animating question that went into my research. I was like, these are people who tend to vote for the Republican Party, but they don't try to convince me every time I have dinner with them that I should be anti-choice or that I should condemn the gay neighbors I have down the street. So what's really going on here? And so I started out, I started out working out of the scholarship of a pretty famous rhetorical theorist, narrative theorist, Walter Fisher, who said that people do things for good reasons, and they do things based on the stories that they live by, and that if we can understand the stories people tell about their lives, then we can understand something about how they order their lives and how they understand their lives. And one of the really amazing things about the evangelical subculture in the United States is that this is a group of people who go to church a lot and listen to sermons a lot, and sermons are comprised of stories. Pastors consistently use stories to explain spiritual concepts, to explain life concepts, and to get people to understand what they think are important concepts for living a good life, both here and in the world to come. And so this gave me a way to try to hear these good reasons about political matters. And so that was sort of what I engaged in. And so over the course of the last, really going back to 2009, when the Great Recession started, I've just been listening to the political economic sermons online of American evangelicals really trying to hear when they talk about politics, when they talk about economics. And what I've discovered is that you actually, inside their churches, you hardly ever hear mention of things like abortion, of the immorality of marriage equality. What you hear instead are warrants that remind voters about the importance of America, the nation, and the idea that the United States is supposed to be a particular kind of nation that protects, that foregrounds Christianity in the public square. And so what I argue is that what evangelicals are voting for is not abortion, they're not voting against abortion, they're not voting against marriage equality so much as they are arguing for a particular kind of citizenship that they find in republicanism that says that Christianity and evangelicalism is primary and comes first, and other ways of being come second. And that is a kind of citizenship that's been long embedded. That idea of the Christian faith has long been embedded in the Republican Party. And that is actually a more nuanced understanding of what happens with republicanism than understanding it as being anti-abortion or in favor of judges or whatever you might have. I was kind of rambling, but that's sort of what I do.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking, the week after a presidential election. And, I've seen statistics on evangelical voters, and I know you talk about that in your book. And so can you help me understand? Because, I mean, on one sense, I can understand this argument about these evangelical voters seeing their citizenship, ultimately in the afterlife or in heaven. But it can appear kind of hypocritical that they are voting for particular policies that, I mean, at least in this administration, right? Thinking about like family separation, for example, or care for the poor. How do you reconcile that? I mean, what kind of stories do people tell themselves to reconcile those facts?
Yeah, so thanks for asking that. So there's a rhetoric that's very particular. I don't know if it's particular, but there's a rhetoric inside the church that I refer to as the rhetoric of active pacifism. And what it says is that it's essential for all citizens, and maybe in particular because of what I just talked about, for evangelical citizens to vote. It's their duty, that they're called to this because people have died for this freedom, and because the founders endowed each of us with endowed us with this Constitution and with this nation. You have to vote, and and evangelicals have a very high rate of public participation. But especially beginning with the Trump-Clinton race in 2016, there's a kind of acknowledgement that the candidates that we were presented with as a nation were maybe subpar. And so what evangelicals did was they said, but look, are you worried? Do you think maybe things aren't going to turn out okay? If they are, guess what? You're already a citizen of heaven first. And what I argue is that that's a kind of, I hate the term doublespeak, but that's what's coming to mind. It gives evangelicals the opportunity to say, I'm voting, and I'm voting for these things that I do like. And I don't mean to suggest they don't care about issues, but it allows them to say, I'm voting for these things I do like, and the things I don't like, well, God's in charge. That's not my responsibility. And so I argue that they take the immaterial artifact of their faith, which makes sense, and they have every obligation, they have every right to. It makes no sense to identify as a Christian if you don't have faith in a life hereafter. And it's actually unfair for people to criticize them for that belief. But the minute you vote and make a material artifact, your vote now counts for something, and it's going to join with other votes, and those votes are going to become policies. And so when you claim credit for some policies but deny responsibility for other policies, that's a move that actually is very slippery. You can't say that God is responsible for the things you don't like, and your civic participation amounts to your civic participation counts for the things you do like. It's actually both. You did both things. And where people see hypocrisy, though, I actually say that like that is a person from the outside putting their priorities onto the evangelical voter. And what you really want to point out is how they have ranked their voting priorities differently. And you should point out to them how they have ranked them differently and ask, did you really mean to do that? Did you mean to make that ranking? They might say yes, but at least they have to acknowledge what they have done.
So do you think that's super helpful? Because there's nuance, and I think like it makes me think about how everyone has a story and we all walk around in the world with a story, and oftentimes we can, put our stories onto other people, right? Without trying to like understand the stories in which they live. Do you think that narrative then applies to all people who identify as Christian? I mean, evangelical can be kind of like this subset, but I think, specifically about some women that I've heard or seen that are more outspoken that might identify with the evangelical movement, but maybe don't.
Yeah, so
that had problems.
Yeah, I mean,
Trump.
we're seeing evidence that so like the early exit polls in 2016 said that 83% or 82%, 81%, a high in the 80s% of evangelicals voted for Trump. And in this last election, only 75%. And that's still a huge number. But there's good reason to believe that especially white evangelical women, and we're talking about white people. I shouldn't be taking that for granted. That's actually a mistake on my part, and I need to do better with that. That women are starting to slip, and women are looking at this and saying, wait a minute, the story that's getting told doesn't match my experience in the world, right? And that's why it's really important to see this, because all of a sudden, when, and it really began with the Access Hollywood tape that you saw, especially some very prominent evangelical women. Beth Moore comes to mind, Jen Hatmaker comes to mind. These are women with public voices inside the movement who spoke out and said, look, I actually don't favor abortion, but that's not the whole of my experience as a woman on earth. And watching evangelical men give Donald Trump a pass for the ways that he's describing women, for this tape, for the things that are happening, watching them say that this is bad, but it doesn't matter enough to make me change my mind. What they said was abortion is important, but if you really listen to what the women said, they said, this doesn't match the story of my life. The story of my life is one where I have been taken for granted. The story of my life is one where men have treated me badly. The story of my life is one, and that's where the rhetoric and the narrative, looking at narratives over issues, really helps to understand what it was that finally got some women to say no more. If you try to look for issues, you can't find them. But when you look at how they started to react to their life experience and to the ways that they saw the men who, in a very patriarchal movement, they regarded as responsible for their lives. Sorry, there's my son. Where they saw the men as responsible, right? Women for a long time inside evangelicalism, and still many women, cede their voices to men. And when men refused to account for the stories of women have started to say, then I will tell my own story. And you're seeing that happen as they very slowly begin to vote in different kinds of ways. I think it was helpful too, to a certain extent, that Joe Biden has spoken about his faith in resonant ways that are unusual for a Democratic president. I cannot do that right now. He wants to show me on his computer. Sorry. Life in COVID-19.
Now you can be famous though, right? Now you have, right, the video of him coming behind you and interrupting and slowly back out. I mean, you haven't made. Your narrative is complete.
There you go.
So I actually wanted to ask about Joe Biden because, I mean, obviously, as you studies the presidency and has been probably following too closely the events of the past 2 weeks.
All of us.
I think it's so interesting. One of the things that's been talked about and juxtaposed is this idea of the family narratives or the family stories that are told about both Trump and Biden, and how Biden really leans into these narratives and also has really sought to elevate the voices of women. And one could make an argument, right, that Donald Trump has done that too, in terms of, the women he's appointed, Kayleigh McEnany, for example. so do you think that does the tone of the narrative matter, I guess is what I'm trying to ask, because you were talking about saying that these women see the things that they're seeing don't match their life experience. And do you think that for evangelicals, I mean, do they pick up on perhaps some of the perceived hypocrisy or the perceived infidelity, for example, related to Trump? I mean, how do they reckon with that? How do they come to terms with kind of what an outside voter might say is this striking disconnect, again, between like family values and how that's evidenced in the election of Trump, for example, in 2016?
Yeah. I don't know. It's too soon to say. I think that I've talked to a lot of people lately, and they have asked if I think that voters in 2020, and like, look, I think we're all a little bit, once again, surprised at how close the election was. I think people were expecting for a stronger repudiation of Trump, white women. So that's just bigger, and I'd have to look more into the data, but white women, once again, a larger percentage of white women went for Trump but then when you start to break it out, it looks different. But like, I had a lot of people ask me if I thought voters were going to, quote unquote, punish the Republicans with their vote. And my research tells me that voters vote based on their lives, right? And they vote based on their stories. And what they want when they vote, what they're asking their leaders to do is hear their voices and their stories. Pay attention to my story. So I'm voting this way because you have told, much like pastors, right? Like, I'm going to this church because the pastor tells stories that make sense to me. That's why I've joined this church. I'm voting for this politician because they're telling a story that makes sense to me. Like, I don't think people typically vote to punish a politician because that you get nothing from that. You end up with there's nothing. And so what do I think women are going, like women who voted for Biden, whether they're evangelical or not, but if we look at evangelical women, I believe that they saw something in Biden. They are seeing something in the Democrats that's causing them to say, there's a story here that resonates with my life. There's something happening. Or they saw a story being told by the Trump administration that was not consonant with what they had understood, right? It's almost like how it felt to me, or the analogy that I give, what happened to this small percentage of evangelicals who peeled off. It's like when you have a movie series and like you get to like the fifth sequel and it's like, no, like the plot doesn't make sense anymore. And there's a way in which it kind of ruins the whole series, right? Like Rocky V, I'm a huge Rocky fan. Rocky V, like, it's like everybody who loves Rocky, you don't even watch Rocky V. You just pretend it never happened. Because if you watch it, right? And so for Republicans, like for these women, it's like, we can't pretend it didn't happen. So now you have to deal with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, because I think, I mean, one thing in my mind, and if I were reviewing your book, like a question that I would have is like, so how do you develop a framework around a narrative that can describe a group identity while also allowing for individual agency, right? Like, have you thought about how this question of individual agency, or this capacity to act and choose, like, are the individuals within this movement constrained by this narrative, or do they have an opportunity to exert their voice?
Well, we didn't talk about it as much as I probably should have, but one of the things that's so interesting about the narrative of active pacifism is when evangelicals when they say, I'm going to vote and then give, but whatever happens is ultimately up to God. One of the things that's strange about that is they cede their civic agency. They cede their democratic agency. They say, I vote, but God decides. And it took me a long time as I was doing the research to see how kind of problematic that was. Because normally we think of voting as the beginning of public participation. We want to get people to vote and then do this and then do this and then do this. And so really what the call to evangelicals from my work would be to say, hey, look, you're responsible. So you have to take responsibility and do something. And so it's actually a call to say, this is a voting constituency that needs to take agency for what's happening, which is why if we go back to saying, you have to point out to people, like, this is your hierarchy of values. Is that really the hierarchy that you want to have? And how can you, and it is actually possible. You don't have to have that hierarchy of values. You can tell the president, I want to have these judges and I want to have policies that don't favor abortion, but that doesn't mean I'm okay with family separation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but what evangelicals are doing now is acting like the trade-off is required because they have this outlet in pacifism that allows them to refuse agency.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that's why I don't think it's particularly helpful to try to engage a narrative of hypocrisy, because it insists that they abandon other priorities in favor of the one that the critic wants them to take on. And I'm not willing to take on the values of my critics, right? Like, if my highest value is climate change, and when people tell, like, I actually am very worried about climate change, but when people try to tell me, well, if you care about climate change, then you're not allowed to go visit your family so your sons can see their grandparents. Like, that's not useful at that point, right? Is there a degree of hypocrisy in my life? Yes, but that's not helpful.
Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
Hello. We can't hear you.
I'm back.
You're back.
See, I'm the person who started talking while I was muted. It was bound to happen to somebody. So I think it's time for us to start a little bit of a Q&A here. And while we wait for anything to come in from the audience, one question I have for you, Sam, is what is it like for to just go to church online that many times? Like, how many?
Yes, I don't think I said this. So yeah, so my main research method is I study church online. That's how I do it, so that I can go to church across the nation, oftentimes the same Sunday, a lot of times. And it sounds very boring. It can be a little boring, but I mainly go to mega churches, and there's a reason these churches are huge. And as a person who loves language and loves rhetoric, it's really actually quite compelling, and you can get really sucked in. And there have been many moments when I find myself kind of like really, I'm really geeky about it. It's really compelling, and I can get really angry, or I can get really swept up, or it was very strange. And it was a very strange experience because I write in the book about how oftentimes the service that I would be attending, because it's archived online, would have happened 2 or 3 months or 6 months before I was attending it. But it felt like present and material, and like it was happening exactly when I was there. And you have this sense that you're hanging out with these tens of thousands of people, and you actually are not. So.
Cool. So is there something, and this can be for either of you, Allison, since you've read some of Sam's work. Do you think that the main sort of media narrative around evangelicals is kind of missing something about what's going on here? Anything specific that they really need to do a better job of focusing on or not focusing on?
Every time a media person, whether it's in the paper or on NPR or ABC News, every time they talk to an evangelical, they're talking to an evangelical who follows politics closely. And so they're getting the opinion of someone who is extremely interested in the issues and who has strong opinions about it, and who is desperate about the candidate running for office. And so if it's a Republican, they think that person has been sent by God to save the world. And if it's a Democrat, they think they're a threat to the nation. And that's by design, because those are the people who are willing to go on camera and talk about it. But it's a misnomer, because much like most people, the vast majority of evangelicals would rather talk about baseball or fishing or scrapbooking or their grandchildren. They don't want to talk about politics. They're worried about starting a fight. They're worried about offending someone. And so it creates an image of this whole subculture as being politically obsessed, angry, and bad neighbors. And that's not true. And I think it's contributing to a political discourse. It's contributing to our polarization, especially because these are people who really do vote. And so where we could have conversations that encourage people to rethink, to understand how they've ranked their priorities, you just have people who are like, well, I'm not talking to them. They're angry, politically obsessed, and like the person I heard on NPR.
Right. So I think maybe one more question, and actually I would love to hear from both of you on this one. So as you were talking, I was thinking about, I do marketing communications, so I do, some strategic campaigns, and I was thinking about like political campaigns and doing, strategic campaigns for, if you're running for office. Do you see any possibilities for some advice for those people doing, these strategic communication plans based on what you're saying here about stories? And Allison, I would really like to hear from you, because somebody who was really good at stories was Ronald Reagan.
He was. Well, and he lives on. I mean,
right.
I think it's, just again, thinking about coming out of this presidential campaign. I mean, it is Ronald Reagan in 1980 who develops the phrase, make America great again. And there is a reason why that resonates with actually a large block of the people who Sam is talking about, right? That this mythic narrative or story of the nation, as American exceptionalism, is very much a part of evangelical political culture, but more broadly from the Republican Party. And I think one of the things that has been striking to me about the Trump campaign is that in some senses they're rejecting some of that mythic narrative by the inward turn or this America First foreign policy. But more broadly, I mean, I would just really echo and amplify what Sam is saying in terms of that stories matter to people. And I think you can have this elite class, they may describe it, this is that this is everyone's watching the news, everyone cares about it all the time. No, like people are living in their everyday real stories. And I think that I would say from, a presidential rhetoric standpoint is one of the reasons why I think Biden was able to connect with voters in a particular way over COVID-19 and the coronavirus, is that recognizing the very real material realities of their lives. And that's a reason why Trump was able to talk about the economy, right? The material realities of people's lives. And these stories resonate with the citizenry in ways that should not be overlooked.
Cool. Okay, we have a question from our audience. Anna Sandelli. Thank you for sharing. I'm excited to read your book. To follow up to Robin's question, in addition to the mainstream media, I'm curious about social media and what, if anything, you've seen there.
Well, social media is a whole other realm, because social media I mean, I could just make a quick comment, which is social media is a place where one of two things happen. Either people go to really enter their own echo chamber and to affirm and reaffirm whatever it is that they already believe. And so it doesn't create good cross-partisan conversation at all. It doesn't allow us to meet people who are different from us very well. And the other thing that happens because of that is the doubling and tripling and quadrupling down on stereotyping. And so, I just see all the time that people will, that it will be like, you get a meme and it's so it's funny, but it really misrepresents a person of faith, or a meme that really misrepresents an elite professor, right? That comes at you from the right, or whatever happens. And so social media takes what is already a problem in the mainstream media and just like bolds and italicizes it. and makes it so that, and then that just gets passed around and passed around. And we all think that the other problem with social media is that we think that mass media has the benefit of being mass. We all see the same thing, right? You watch Supermarket Sweeps. That was you might have been able to pause it and have a personalized experience when you watched it, but it's the same program. But even like, you know, Dr. Prasch and I have really very similar lives. We both have sons who are the same age. We're both professors. We graduated at roughly the same time. We have all these things in common. We have similar interests. We both like to run. I mean, I could just go on and on. There's a reason that we get along with each other very well and support each other. And yet, because of the algorithms of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, we probably could be sitting next to each other and our social media feeds would look totally different because of how well the internet knows us. And so even not even talking about just our friends, right? And that is one of the problems with mass media, with how we look at things and how we see things. Sorry for going on so long, but
that's okay. And I think we have another question from Steve Smith. This is the guy who thinks everybody has a snake story. So, are there differences in the stories that motivate or influence younger versus older evangelicals?
It's really hard to get demographic data about subgroups by age. So I can't answer that question for sure. I didn't do my study by age. And the only thing we do know is that young evangelicals are no more likely to vote than young people across the board. There is some evidence that younger evangelicals are less animated by especially gay marriage, and that they are done with that. And that won't continue to be anything that matters to them. I'm very interested to see what happens with the new Supreme Court and decreased access to abortion, if that continues to happen, or as evangelicals realize that in the event that Roe v. Wade were overturned, what happens when evangelicals realize that doesn't actually make abortion illegal? That because I'm not sure there's good understanding that overturning Roe simply returns the matter to the states. I think a lot of those Christians actually think that makes abortion illegal, and so I'm really curious what that would mean.
Cool. I think we have a couple of more questions from C.T. Jenkins here. Since you have attended megachurches, even if it's online, do you have any insight as to why these congregations don't push back against their millionaire pastors?
Yeah, so this is a distinction that I should make. I do not study churches that are affiliated with what's known as the prosperity gospel. The prosperity gospel is probably what this question is thinking of. That would be like churches that, like with Creflo Dollar and Joel Osteen. Those are, we might even think of those as like feel-good churches. So mega churches are churches that have more than 2,000 attendees per week. And most of the churches I study are between like 2,000 and 5,000, which is tons of people. But most of them don't have millionaire pastors, and they're not the churches that we're thinking of here. The pastors make enough money to have a nice life, but they're not like the celebrity pastors that you're thinking of there.
Okay, cool. All right, let's do one more. Have you seen non-evangelical voters also fall into the same traps as evangelical voters in terms of voting by key issues as it affects them without holding politicians accountable?
Yeah, so one of the things that the main assumption that undergirds my book is not my idea at all. It comes to us from political science. And it is that we live in an age of political identity. So most people think, how the political scientists explain it, most people like to believe that they choose their politicians the way a banker chooses an investment, right? Very carefully mapping it out, making a decision. But it's not true. Most of us choose our politicians the way we choose the teams that we root for. And so I always explain it this way. I grew up in a family that was from North Dakota, and North Dakota doesn't have pro teams, so we rooted for the teams from Minnesota. And so we were always against the Packers. And so, for more than 10 years, I thought that Brett Favre was, the devil, and I hated his guts because I was a Packer. I mean, I was a Viking. Like, he is the worst. And then, Brett Favre finished his career being a quarterback for the Vikings, and I thought he was going to take us to the Super Bowl, and I loved him. And he almost did. And I never have gone back to hating Brett Favre, but when he makes it to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, I bet you he's going to go in as a Packer, and then I'm going to hate him again. Right. And that's because of my identity as a Vikings fan. And so most voters, and if people who are progressives or who identify as Democrats are honest, like thinking forward to the next election, you're already imagining yourself voting for the Democrat, even though you don't know who that is. If you imagine yourself as a Republican, the opposite is true. And this is the truth about how we are. And it's just like I don't hold Brett Favre accountable. Just like my husband, who's a Steelers fan, he doesn't hold Roethlisberger accountable for some of the assaults he made against women. Because our team, politics are very much the same.
Great. All right. Okay. It looks like Casey's popping back in. That means it's time for us to wrap up. Thank you both so much for being here. Real quick before you go away, why don't you each give us the title of your book again?
My book is Decoding the Digital Church, Evangelical Storytelling, and the Election of Donald Trump. It should be coming your way at the end of January.
All right. Allison.
And my book's a little bit further behind than Sam's, but the tentative title is The Global Rhetorical Presidency, Cold War Rhetoric on the World Stage. And I am in the process of finalizing the manuscript to send it off.
And it's going to be great.
Let us know when you finish it up and we'll bring you back.
I'd love to be here. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Sam, I think you're going to stick around with us for a few minutes.
Yep.
Casey, what do we have next?
Up next, we have our next segment, which is Check This Out. All right, and we're here now for the segment Check This Out with Paris Whalon, who is the Student Success Librarian for Media Literacy here at UTK. Her focus is helping the UT community understand how to create and critically analyze media from different perspectives. Obviously, a vital role that you play at the UT libraries for our students in our Vol community. Welcome, Paris.
Hey, thanks, Casey. I'm super stoked to be here. Media literacy in my ish. So since this is the first episode, I kind of want to give our viewers an introduction to the segment and what I'm hoping they'll gain from it. So as mentioned, my name is Paris, and I'm the Media Literacy Librarian at UTK. And Check This Out is going to focus heavily on the 5 components of media literacy, which are, I have great props for this. Hope you enjoy them. Access, small iPad. Analyze, use your brain, think about it, evaluate. It's not working out. It's a magnifying glass.
Got it.
Create, there's different forms. And to act, this is my mini megaphone. So my intention is to tie all those components into the topic being discussed in these episodes, but also to give our viewers the tools that they need to empower them to develop their own informed, keyword here being informed, opinion. And you can use these tools in general, regardless of the media format being books and whatnot. So with that being said, let's go ahead and bring in one of our guests from earlier, Sam Martin, who's agreed to hang around and answer a few questions that focus on access, analyzing, and evaluating sources. So, hey, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
Great. So before we even get started, I am a native Texan. Do you find this obnoxious?
Yes.
I get it. I really have to like shove it down to not be like, woo, Texas. So thanks for dealing with us. As a scholar, we're both part of universities, and they give us unique access to information, especially databases, things that are behind big paywalls. Because we are scholars, we have experience in being skeptical and kind of looking at our sources underneath a critical lens. When you did your research, for your book, what kind of sources and types of media did you use, and what criteria do you follow to evaluate the credibility of these sources?
Yeah, so when I get an idea, the first thing I do is say to myself, okay, I know that this is a brand new idea to me, but it's not a brand new idea to the world. So the very, very first place I go is not Google, because Google, if I'm going to do research, I never go to Google first. I've learned the hard way, right? So the first place I go, if I could show you my screen, you'd see it. Like the very first thing on my bookmark bar is Central University Library with the little SMU logo. Okay. And if it's research that I'm doing, and I click on that and I go to the menu bar there and I type in whatever it is that I want to find. And then because I'll type it in. So like, for example, I'm working on a new project about conservative evangelicals and race, right? And so this summer I went there and I typed in evangelicals and race, and I got back way too many. And so I backed out again, and I put in I put in Black Lives Matter and evangelicals, and that got me closer, right? And then always in the sidebar, I've learned I can click in our library and I can like look at, do I want to see peer-reviewed journal? Do I want popular media? Do I want peer-reviewed journal articles? Do I want books? And I typically will choose a book, because inside a book, I'm going to get, and if I have an online book now, all the better, I can go to the bibliography and I can see all kinds of other sources that I know are going to have been like checked out. They have been cleared because they've been published. The other thing I love about going to the Central University Library, which has gotten even better, the only good thing about COVID is there's always a tab on the right side of my screen that says, do you need help? Ask a librarian. And they're always right there. So if I can't figure out the right search term, they're always right there. And so my research always begins with reading. And if it's research that I'm actually wanting to publish, I always like for the last 10, I'm not just saying this because you're asking me this. This is like really actually true. I always begin on the library website to get stuff to read and think about.
Oh, I really appreciate that. That is something I'm definitely going to touch on later, so I'm glad you brought it up. I have one more question for you that I think our millions of viewers out there that are joining us tonight are going to appreciate. Do you have any suggestions or starting points for someone who is new to this topic and would like to learn more? My
topic?
Yes.
Yeah, if you want to know more about my topic, great places to begin would be, there's something called the Hartford Institute for Religious Research, which is a place that I use all the time, and they study all this kind of stuff. That I go to. They haven't been updating as much in the last couple of years as they used to, but it's still a treasure trove of good research. There is, if you want to know more about it, PRRI, the Public Religion Research Institute, is a wonderful place to go and learn things about public religion in the United States. And then the Pew Research Center always has, it should be coming out within the next month, they always have a big survey that comes out, and it's always called How the Faithful Voted. And you can look in the past to see what happened, and you can look now. And those are places where you can just spend all kinds of time and just see. One of the neat things that I really find interesting, if you go to the PRRI site that really disabuses people of some of their assumptions about white evangelicals, if you look at like, do you approve of Donald Trump's job performance? Evangelicals score really high. That's when you see them in the 80%. It's like, oh yeah. But if it says like, do you like him? Do you think he's a good person? Then it's like sometimes like 39, 30, 40%. And you really see that distinction that I'm trying to talk about, that like disabusing of the stereotype. Like they know that he's not the kind of president they used to vote for. They have this kind of cognitive dissonance going on. And you can look at that site and really see it and play with it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks for that. And thanks for the suggestions. thanks for joining us again, and we're going to move on to the next section.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a really fun time.
Hey.
Hey.
So thanks for hanging out for a second. I'm just going to like ramble on about some media literacy stuff for our viewers. So if you'll just hang out for a second, I'm going to come back to you so we can do our discussion.
All right. I'll just sit here and chill.
Sweet. Thanks. So now we've heard from a practitioner. Let's discuss what you as a viewer can do to become a more informed consumer of media. So at this part, we're going to kind of talk about the create and act portion or components of media literacy. I want to kind of start out by thinking about how many hours a day you spend as an individual consuming media. Before this segment, I checked my phone and it's just the digital stuff, social media, Instagram, things like this, some news channels here and there. It told me I was spending about 5 hours and 39 minutes, but I'm 29% less than last week. So woo, me. Anyways, what is yours? Check it out and think about that. All that time period you're spending scrolling on your phone, you're just consuming media. You might not be thinking about it. You might actually really be thinking about it, but you're taking this in. So I want to give you all some simple guidelines to be aware of and hopefully follow as you're scrolling through these media feeds. Now, these guidelines came from the News Literacy Project. Go ahead and check that out. You can just type it into Google. So it's a News Literacy Project. They have some great information, but I want to talk about an infographic that they have that encourages good information hygiene, and it's titled Sanitize Before You Share. Now, this can be applied to any form of media, whether it be your auntie posting something on Facebook, like a meme or an article, or it could be a video of someone getting interviewed and spreading out statistics with authority. So take the time out and just kind of listen to these things. But the point of this infographic is to kind of stop the spread of misinformation. So there's 4 steps in it. The first one's pause, second glance, do a quick search, and then ask for the search or ask for the source, sorry. So 1, pause. Before you go off on your auntie, do not do it. Just step back from just a second. If it is a video, maybe you pull out your phone or piece of paper and just jot down what they said and any details that they gave. Like if they quoted their source, go ahead and write that down as well. Second, glance through the comments. You may not have to tell anybody anything. Somebody might have gone ahead and checked them. Someone might have already put the source in there, and you can just sit there and like giggle to yourself, because that's also gratifying, to be honest. Third, you want to do a quick search. Go ahead and just type that into Google or even the platform that you're on and see if someone else is talking about it. See what they're saying. You can go across the board from, Foxx, CNN, or other social media platforms like Twitter and see if it's being covered at all. And if there's an original source for it, so you can have a little bit more context. And then finally, if all else fails, you can ask for the source from that person. They may have just received a portion of the video. Most of us have just a tiny bit of experience with video editing. So it's easy enough to kind of cut videos into what you want for it to be. So maybe you need to take the time to just ask them where they got it from. So these are basic skills that pretty much everyone can take to strengthen their own critical thinking skills and to be one less person contributing to the spread of misinformation. So thanks for hanging out there, Casey. Let's go ahead. I know you had a couple of questions for me. Go ahead and ask them. Are you frozen? Oh, I think you're muted.
Frozen and muted. Frozen and muted. That's a twofer right there. All right. So yeah, that's really, really great information, Paris, and stuff we can all remember and think about as we're evaluating our what's coming at us. So what are some fact-checking sources that I can use during my quick search for credible information?
Yeah, we're getting information at massive speed. So go ahead and take your time with whatever you are doing. You might have to take a moment out and step back, but One of the ones that I just discovered, a coworker actually gave it to me, is a media bias chart. The link might be placed somewhere later on, but you can just look it up on Google. I promise it'll come out. But it kind of lays out the media landscape based on reliability and bias. So it answers questions such as, does your source tend to lean left or right? Do they tend to exaggerate? Or are they mostly opinion or propaganda? These are questions that the chart can help answer, but it's also a part of finding the source of the information and their motivations, which are going to be a key part of the process. But this is a really decent start. It's not the only one. Another option is Snopes.com, which is an online fact-checking resource that's been around since 1994, mind you. I had no idea. But anyways, I like them because they always link to and document their sources. So readers are empowered to do independent research and make up their own minds, which is what I'm trying to encourage all of our listeners to do today. And finally, as I stated earlier, check and see if anyone else is discussing it. That's going to be a big indicator for you. Any other questions for me?
Yeah, well, as a UT librarian, what sources does the UTK community have access to that may help with the process for students who are have access to UT libraries?
Yeah, Sam actually made a great point earlier. Even if you're not a part of the UTK community, go ahead and check in with your librarian. Your local librarian has tons of resources and they are there to help you. We're really excited to share information with you. That's like what we do. But at UTK, we have tons of resources as well. And you don't even have to come into the library anymore. You can literally chat in and ask your question at lib.utk.edu. We also have, beyond our librarians, we have LibGuides. LibGuides are super underused. We spend all this time putting them together, and they're basically a compilation of all the information you are looking for in one space. So it's usually dedicated to something like communications. You can find information about how to do your research, databases, and things like that. It's all in one place, and you don't have to speak to somebody if you don't want to. You also just have one space where you can just continue to go back to it, and it's a little easier to keep up with that versus all these different conversations. Another resource is Subject Librarians, and I say this very specifically because we have a list, and everyone has an assignment. Well, most liaisons have an assignment where we are assigned to specific departments. So if I am communications, there's a good chance I don't know anything about biology. There's someone there specifically for that. So if you have a question that is beyond just like average knowledge that maybe someone can get to you, you have someone that can help you. So you should definitely feel free to ask these individuals. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Gosh, what a great, I mean, all these are great resources, but knowing that every student, no matter what they're studying, has a librarian that's just for them and their topic, that is such a vital thing and so exciting. This has been wonderful, Paris. Do you have anything else to add for us at the end of this segment?
Yeah, I did forget to mention databases because you do have access to them from home. So like once again, you don't even have to go into the library. You can simply search from home. So that should make it a little bit easier.
And UT Libraries has a ton of databases, right? Anything you could imagine, just about.
Yeah, databases, and then we have plenty of subscriptions to journals. So you have a lot of information at your fingertips. All you got to do is ask somebody to help you sort through it, and we're glad to do that. So now that our viewers are a little bit more aware of what it means to be media literate and how to check their family, I guess, and others who are recklessly posting misinformation, I do want to ask our viewers to spend just a little bit more time examining their sources and what they're consuming. And whenever they see misinformation or information that's just out of context, or that may be illiterate or inaccurate, I want for them to call it out. So thanks for joining me, Casey. I do want to leave you one little drop of wisdom from the founder of Snopes.com, which is distinguish fact from opinion. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paris. This is fabulous info. And yeah, very timely and very useful for everybody going forward. So thanks for your time and thanks for checking this out with us.
Yeah.
And next, I think we have Who do we have? Is it Ingrid coming up?
And this is Stories from the Stacks, where we discuss important things. Tonight, we will investigate that controversial canine, Smokey, with university archivist and all things UTK expert, Alicia Schomer. Hello, Alicia.
Hi.
To begin, I have some pressing questions. Is there more than one Smokey? How long can one dog live? Is Smokey a clone? A vampire? The people want to know. Alicia, who is Smokey?
Well, Smokey is UTK's very best boy. He is our blue tick hound mascot, and he started being our mascot in 1953.
1953. And yet, there's more than one, or is there?
So there's 10 in total. So they each have their own reign. And so the longest Smokey reign was about 11 and a half years. And that was our Smokey 3, which was a descendant of the very first Smokey, Smokey number 1.
Okay. One particular Smokey lives in infamy. A dog napping.
Smokey 2. Yes.
A tussle with the bear, and a rabies scare. Can you tell us more about this illustrious dog?
Yeah, so Smokey 2 holds the title of being the most controversial and also the funniest of all of the dogs. So it all started when Kentucky students decided to come in at night and to the farm where Smokey 2 lived. And he was the son of Smokey 1, so he lived on a farm in North Knoxville. And they actually dog-napped him and took him back to Lexington. So they left a note for the owner of Smokey 2 and said he was well taken care for, but he would be there until the game that Saturday.
Interesting.
So in retaliation, UT students went to go and find a mascot for Kentucky at the time. However, their Wildcat mascot had passed away 2 years prior, but they had one, unfortunately, that was stuffed. And they stole the Wildcat stuffed image of their mascot. And so at that time in the 50s, they would have a joint pep rally before the game. And so we knew that our Smokey was there and that we had their representative, their mascot, but it didn't get returned until actually right before the game. And he was returned cloaked in a Kentucky flag.
Kentucky.
Mm-hmm. And that seems to be the most controversial time. Kentucky had tried to dog-nap him. And then a week later, after just being home, Vanderbilt attempted to dog-nap him again. And unfortunately, at the time, he was living with his brothers and sisters that all kind of looked alike. And they stole the wrong Smokey hound.
So a clone.
So Vanderbilt had got it all wrong and had taken the poor owner's hunting dog, Old Rusty, and actually had taken him back. And it was kind of funny that we just made fun of them for that and taking the wrong dog. And Smokey paraded around happily at the next game.
Okay, interesting. Now Smokey also had a tussle with a bear?
Yeah, so Baylor Bear, during their pep rally and during all the excitement before the game, Smokey, of course, being a hunting dog, didn't like being that close to the Baylor Bear. So we had Smokey on a leash, and the Baylor Bear was also being restrained as well. But they got pretty close enough that the bear swiped him across the face.
So this is a real bear.
This is a real bear. Yeah, so at the time, and then Smokey went right after him, lunging forward. The students that were holding him had to pull him back, and it was enough that they had to separate them from then on.
Now I want to turn to more somber discussions. Smokey 2's life ended in a shroud of mystery. Was it murder or was it an accident? It involves chocolate pie. I don't understand. How could a dog get access to a chocolate pie? And it also involves a university that rhymes with Banucky.
Yes, I don't know that we want to blame Smokey 2's death or murder on that particular university, but many students felt that that's what happened. So what the papers had reported at the time is that Smokey 2, after UT won the game against that university that rhymes with
Banucky.
There you go. So when UT was celebrating and getting all their things together after the game, somehow Smokey 2 had gotten into eating almost an entire chocolate pie. And as most of us, dog owners know that chocolate can be very detrimental to dogs. Or actually can be very allergic and make them have really bad stomach pains and even cause death in many dogs. So they rushed him to the vet. He stayed there overnight, and then the vet found in Lexington found out that he had ingested quite a bit of chocolate and had passed away from that.
So explain to me, why was a chocolate pie anywhere near Smokey? He's a fighting dog. He's a mascot. Explain that to me.
I get that question quite a bit. They're like, what? Someone had to bring this chocolate pie. Why would it be at a football game? What happened to him?
Random chocolate pies just flying everywhere.
Yeah. So actually that was investigated, and they found out that it was actually being sold at the concession stands at that particular game. So it could have been as simple as someone just leaving it under their bleachers, didn't finish it, and he got into it. We don't know for sure, but it's still shrouded in mystery.
Well, the facts have a way of taking the fun out of things, so I'll choose to believe that the case is still open and that the murderers may or may not be out there and may or may not be affiliated with a university that rhymes with Banucky. So, Alicia, thank you very much, and good night, and appreciate your continuing.
If you need any more facts checked about all things UT, come find us at the Betsey B. Creekmore Special Collections and University Archives. We have all the facts, and we can help you find them.
Yes, and you can also find more facts at Volopedia. Is that
Volopedia? That is our UT online encyclopedia. That is all things facts and figures, and all of the Smokies and all of their journeys and all of their reigns are on there documented, so you can find out more about them there.
Thank you, Alicia.
Well, looks like we have reached the end of our show this evening. I thought that went pretty well.
Thank you.
How are you feeling about it? All right. I think I'll end us with this. During our broadcast, I got a text from our dean, Steve Smith, who reminded me that many world religions actually start with a snake story. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great night.